Hello, everybody. I'm Dan Limbach. I'm the producer of the Pharma Voice Webcast Network, and I'll be your off-camera facilitator for today's session. Welcome to our Think Tank event entitled COVID-19 Vaccinating the Remaining Populations, brought to you by Pharma Voice in partnership with our good friends at Real Chemistry. We have an outstanding crowd today, and we'll certainly do our very best to make it worth your while. We are recording this event, and we will send you a link to the on-demand archive in about 24 hours so you can review the event at your leisure. So let's dive into the program. We have a very knowledgeable panel of experts in the tank with us today to discuss adoption issues for the COVID-19 vaccine. Let's meet our esteemed panelists. Taryn Groen, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Pharma Voice, will moderate the discussion. We're also happy to welcome Seth Duncan, Chief Data Officer, Real Chemistry, and Dr. Reed Tuckson, MD, FACP, Managing Director, Tuckson Health Connections, LLC. I'm going to hand it off to Taryn now. Taryn, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. After months of incentivizing Americans to get vaccinated, immunization rates for COVID-19 have yet to reach the levels required to achieve herd immunity. At the same time, the Delta variant has taken hold, representing 10% of infections in early June and close to 100% of new cases by August 2021. Losing patients, governments, and businesses are beginning to mandate vaccinations for specific groups, but it is unclear if these mandates will hold or if they will be successful. Despite the media attention on the topic, more needs to be done to help remaining populations feel confident enough to get the shot. I'm so excited to be with our panelists today as we explore what it will really take to get us back to our pre-pandemic lifestyles. Today, we're going to talk about the current state of the state, what the new normal looks like given the fact that COVID is now being viewed as endemic. How do we continue to get those who are vaccine hesitant comfortable with getting the shot? And what new treatments are coming on the scene? So Dr. Tuckson, I'd like to turn to you first. Let's talk about the current state of the state. What are you hearing?
Well, I think what we are appreciating is that the current state of affairs is uncertain but overwhelmingly concerning. I think we now understand and realize that we will, without extraordinary good fortune at this point, not reach the level of herd immunity or vaccination coverage necessarily to stomp this thing out. This is headed towards not only an endemic disease, but also we are facing several months of real crisis as more and more people become overwhelmingly sick. As we watch our healthcare delivery system be cracked and fractured in many, many states. And as we watch the retrenchment continue to dig in by far too large a segment of the population. I think that the president's recent announcement around pushing forward with much more mandates was essential and needed, despite the fact that it may push some people into more resistance. But I think that we can feel at least comfortable that we've done everything we can possibly do to reach those in a humane, compassionate, loving, facilitatory ways to try to encourage those who are not vaccinated to become vaccinated. Unfortunately, they've now had more than enough time to tell us that they're not moving. And as a result, the mandates were very important. Finally, I would just say by way of introduction that I am particularly concerned about the state of the nations, of significant parts of our nation who simply do not believe anymore in science, in evidence, nor do they believe in the people who are responsible as professional experts to convey science and expertise. This is a very, very scary and troubling phenomenon as we go forward, not only for fighting COVID, but the nature of the patient-physician relationship and large public health interventions in communities across the country.
I agree. I think that we have reached this inflection point where we just don't know how it's going to tip. And unfortunately, I think a lot is in balance right now. Seth, you talk to a lot of folks and you have your finger on the pulse at Real Chemistry. What do you see as the current state of the state?
I tend to agree. It's a little, there's a lot to be concerned about. And I think, clearly in parts of the country where the vaccination rates are very low, you're starting to see impact on populations that hadn't really been impacted, at least from a health perspective before, such as, younger populations, children, pediatric populations. I believe last I saw, the latest stat I saw is that about 27% of new cases are among children under 17 in the US as of a couple weeks ago. So that's deeply concerning, and that is an unvaccinated group. So at the moment, until there's some sort of emergency use authorization or some sort of change, it's hard to imagine how we're going to kind of keep that under control, especially in areas like the South that tend to over-index in unvaccinated people, and that is where you're seeing a lot of the cases among children. On the flip side, though, I think one of the things that I am encouraged by is that minds can change, and even though it's a very unfortunate and disappointing means of getting people's minds to change, what you do see in the data, and actually the Kaiser Family Foundation, they have a weekly update, and you're starting to see this a little bit in their data, is that when people are infected or close members of their family are infected, their attitudes about vaccination does change. And I think that comes back to the fact that many unvaccinated Americans, they're not just skeptical of the vaccines, they're skeptical about the dangers of COVID-19. And again, minds can change, just unfortunately, a lot of people have to go through a lot of pain and suffering to get to that change. But we are seeing it slowly.
And I think there's a domino effect to this that is not getting reported. So when we have folks who are entering the hospital with COVID, and there are no more hospital beds, and we are resource scarce in terms of doctors and nurses, that we're seeing that other folks who have diseases or car accidents aren't being treated because there's just no place for them. So this is a community issue, not just a personal issue. And maybe there needs to be more education and visibility around the domino effect of this COVID pandemic.
That's an important observation, and let us really underscore the pain of the health professional workforce and the support services, the ward clerks, the janitors, all of them are just worn out, and we do need to underscore that. But there is an assumption that you've made in this question that I think we have to really dig into, and that is, if we have learned anything from this pandemic, it is that there is an almost unfathomably large number of people in this country who simply do not care about other people. And that is one of the things that I am most concerned about. This pandemic has shown a bright light on the fact that what most of us thought was a given, that you absolutely will do everything in your power to protect human life, and especially protecting children's lives, that this is like the job one for a democratic civilization. And now we find out that no, that is with an extraordinarily, unfathomably large section of the population, that is not the driving force, that people are making choices and decisions that say that my rights to not wear a mask is much more important than whether or not I could kill you. And so I think the reason why I'm raising that, and I really appreciate Seth's a responsible answer earlier, that we must look not only at the negative, but at the positive. I think I'll take my lesson from Seth and say that while there are certainly great stories of human compassion and loving and selfless behavior, I still say that I am sobered by the implications for all of our efforts going forward around the fact that no, whether or not people can die because they cannot get a hospital bed for their stroke or their heart attack, because those beds are filled with COVID people, that somehow that will change my behavior as someone who's dug in as an anti-masker and anti-vaxxer. That's probably not the case. And that is something that we're going to have to deal with as a society. So what that comes back to is not just an education effort. We're going to have a conversation and an effort that gets back to connecting to the fact that we are all part of one human family with an ethical and moral responsibility for each other.
Yes, well said. I don't even want to go further than that. We'll move on to the next question I have for you all. And that is in terms of what will that new normal look like after we get that fact COVID is now being viewed as endemic. So if we're going to have to live with this virus for the longer term or short term, whatever that is, and we continue to see variants come up, what does life look like now? Is it going to be that we have booster shots and we'll treat this similarly to the flu, and our pharmaceutical companies now looking to develop drugs that treat the effects of COVID? So where do we go from here? Dr. Tuckson?
I think that we certainly recognize first and foremost the most immediate where do we go from here will be what happens with new variants, whether it's the mu variant or other variants that will keep us in a crisis mode before we shift into what you, I think, accurately describe as an endemic mode. But I'm really worried about the next crisis of the next mutation that's more frightening than Delta. And what I'm saying is that we have to be prepared for that we can't start thinking too far ahead and not focus that we've got some real crises right on our doorstep. That being said, I think it's inevitable that we will be seeing this behaving like the flu, and that the need for periodic modifications in vaccines on a regular basis. I think we also do understand that there will be a very heavy market now that will exploit the new understandings in our clinical and science research that will tell us that things like monoclonal antibody technologies, which are exploding now, which are so important for this disease, but they'll be important. That technology will be important for other conditions as well. And so I think that we will see that as being very, very powerful, as well as other therapeutic interventions. My gosh, the genius of the biopharma industry will certainly bring us the opportunity to treat similar kinds of conditions like COVID in more effective ways. So for that, I'm excited. I hope that what it also means going forward with this sort of new normal is that we will see a more robust support financially and otherwise for our public health infrastructure. That being said, I think it's going to be very difficult to get that done in many states, because we're going to see a very concomitant heavy dose of political pressure put on public health departments from this point forward in many of our states. And so I think this is a battle that I hope the biopharma industry will take on in support of our public health departments. Without the strong support of our major corporate research entities in partnership with the public health infrastructure, public health is going to get run over like a truck in many of these communities, and that worries me greatly.
Seth, Dr. Tuckson brings up some very significant points in terms of public health and what we need to do in terms of providing greater equity, perhaps, for communities that have been underserved. What are you seeing from some of the data that you're looking at?
Well, what you typically see, and this is something that we've seen really since the emergency use approval in the fall, is that the individuals that are least likely to want to get vaccinated tend to be lower income, lower education, and that trend, that actually transcends ethnic boundaries to a great degree. I guess in terms of access, I suppose that at this point it seems like if anybody that really wants to get a vaccine, they're more or less available. I don't think that it's not like in the early fall, in the fall or in the spring where you had to travel a great distance, wait in long lines. At this point, it really does seem like a battle against the hesitant. Individuals that have made at least some decision or strong indecision to not get vaccinated. In the data, I actually, in every poll that I've seen, the biggest holdout group still tends to be among sort of right-leaning, white, lower educated Americans. Like that seems to be the group that is holding out the most out of anybody that we see here. And I think to some degree, reaching them obviously is a challenge. Like I said earlier, I think that you do see that they will change their mind if they get sick or a close family member gets sick, right? So unfortunately, there's a bit of a lack of imagination in terms of predicting that, hey, maybe this is something that really could hurt me or my family or my community. But I also would say, we did a lot of research in the spring where we essentially, and we've published this, we can share the results, later here, but we ran a survey with about 3,000 or 4,000 individuals in the US. We asked them, if a COVID-19 shot was made available to you today, would you take it? And we asked some follow-up questions around the perceived efficacy and safety of the vaccines. And then we basically worked with a third-party data provider that got these respondents, and we looked at, with obviously the consumers, these individuals' gave permission to do this, we looked at anonymized credit card transactions and looked at how they spent their money and their time. And one of the things that we saw that really kind of, transcended even political boundaries is that the people that were really hesitant, they were lower income, less educated, but there's other things that were really surprising to us. So these people tended to just not see much risk in the world at all. They tended to spend their money very freely. They spent more, again, controlling for income, spent more of their income on consumer packaged goods than others. They tended to have more kind of rotating and open lines of credit. They tended to shop far more in brick and mortar stores than online. There's just sort of like a certain type of individual that just doesn't see risk in the world. They're a little bit impulsive. And we don't believe that actually being a Republican causes you to not want to get vaccinated. We think that there's underlying factors that maybe right now are leading some people to lean politically a certain way or to maybe not get vaccinated. And I think if you focus on some of these underlying factors that are very predictive of whether somebody gets vaccinated or not, it actually makes this less of a challenge. I mean, so for example, we know that these people probably don't have a deep ideological problem with vaccination. So as a result, if you just meet them where they are, make getting a vaccine easy for them, and even give them a small monetary reward, we think that will go a much further way. Some of these other sort of things like the lottery systems, our data suggests that won't work because these people are not long-term planners. If you tell them like, hey, maybe you'll win some money some point or maybe not, that's just not concrete enough for them. And so, I do think that, again, it has to be very immediate where you reach these people. And that's why when they get sick or their family members get sick, suddenly it's a reality. It's immediate for them. You have to kind of engage them that way. And I guess I don't mean to like skirt around your question around access, but I do think it's important to maybe take a slightly different approach of thinking about how you actually can change these people's minds and actually engage with them in a way that's going to be effective, kind of given the nature of these populations.
I like what Seth is saying here, and I want to continue to have the glass half full approach as opposed to half empty. However, we are going to have to confront one element, Seth, I think, in your analysis, and that is misinformation. The level of misinformation is so extraordinary now, and so specific and so tied in with so many other coexistent strains of thought in the society, so that anything you click on to ask a question about one thing, these folks are very good at making sure you click then into something else and something else, and before you know it, you're down the rabbit hole. I was very disappointed to see in the news today the Amazon company that they're in their book section, the trending books are those now that are all about misinformation, not how to stop it or concern. It's about books that have misinformation. And so we've got real issues here that we're going to have to deal with, because I think even as we look at how the biotechnology industry, how are you going to down the road be able to convince people about the benefits of your products that have inside of them things like messenger RNA or unusual, complicated terms and words. And so we're all going to face those things. And finally, I think one of the things that I'm actually excited about, and it kind of goes along with what Seth does for a living. When you watch the commercials on television advertising any drug, they represent and present a picture of joy, of happiness in a variety of different states. It doesn't matter what the product is. They're all about some slice of American life that makes you want to be alive, that makes you want to participate, whether it's going to a picnic with a bunch of people and watching the band, or whether it's the birthday party, whatever the issue is. The point being, I hope that we could find a way to corral the knowledge, the intelligence of the survey pollsters like Seth, along with the advertising companies that this industry employs, that says, okay, tell us now, how do we reach people? If you were going to sell compliance with anti-COVID messaging, what do you know about the way to reach those people that are the not anti-vaxxers? Because at the end of the day, you're getting ready to get paid a whole lot of money to try to reach them with a specific product in the new environment. So might as well have us have the secondary benefit of the public health environment, learning and understanding the triggers and the keys to selling these new innovations.
Dr. Tuxen, I love how you said, how are you going to sell compliance? I think that is an amazing concept. And we know that compliance and adherence just outside of COVID is already a challenge. So how do you break that code? And the data that you presented is fascinating. So really trying to drill down deep into those cohorts of the population is the way to reach some of these folks. We thought perhaps with the FDA approval, it was out of emergency use. That could have swung the needle a little bit, but it moved it just minutely in terms of public perception. And that's a shame. It goes back to what you were saying about the misinformation. So
right, exactly. And what I'm sort of getting at here is that, as a public health communicator, I certainly focus so much of my conversation with the American public on facts, data, science. The commercials for in the pharma world really are not at all interested in facts or data and science. They're interested in emotion.
Don't tell that to Seth.
Those are emotion messages. And I think what we have done too much is we have so focused in, because we had to, on technical points and not enough on emotion. And that's what I think we can benefit from. And so I'm just urging the industry, make available the people that do your commercials to us in a new way.
All right, so go reorganize all of advertising for us now. No, seriously. I mean, so what are you at Real Chemistry? You have a lot of tentacles out there. What are you all thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of, reaching these difficult to reach individuals and really helping them change their belief systems about the mRNA vaccines in particular, but also I think changing their attitudes about COVID, because again, a lot of the hesitancy is there is misinformation about the mRNA vaccines, and there's a lot of concern. I mean, actually, this is another horrifying stat. This just came out with another Kaiser Family Foundation stat from one of their weekly reports. Out of everybody who's gotten both doses of their vaccine in the United States that have kids, only 48% will say that they're ready to get their kids vaccinated. Only half of vaccinated adults. And I think a lot of that does stem from the fact that people, even though the mRNA vaccines are safe, incredibly effective, scientifically amazing, there's still, even among people that are willing to take that chance, and I'm using bunny ears here, they don't want their kids to do it. And so we're still far off, even with the vaccinated, in terms of getting their attitudes to change. So we are. I mean, we work closely with the Ad Council. We work closely with a lot of pharma manufacturers to obviously develop, more, I guess for lack of a better word, more emotional campaigns that really remind people what's at stake, by not getting vaccinated, and what the community benefits are to getting vaccinated. But I think at the same time, I know that that's not the only route here. And I do think, unfortunately, even though the mRNA vaccines are effective, I think that as more vaccines, non-mRNA vaccines, maybe become available globally, I think we might see individuals that were previously, or for whatever reason, you just can't convince them with that in science. They might be more open to, again, more traditional, methods of vaccination. I have seen some data from Harris that suggests that some of these parents, for example, that don't want to get their kids vaccinated with an mRNA vaccine would consider a quote unquote more traditional vaccine. That's the phrase that Harris uses. So again, it's a mixture of kind of, developing new solutions and communication.
What's so interesting is that these parents have to have their children vaccinated for other things, for them to attend, just go to school, for instance. So what's the hesitancy about the COVID vaccine? Is it because there's just not enough data available yet? Or I don't understand that.
I think what Seth is getting at is really, really key here, and that is it's genetic based. This is to the public. This isn't a regular vaccine, even though we've never asked what was in any other vaccine. The idea that this is a genetic based vaccine, that's the big deal. And so I think that what this opens up the doorway for, and again, I keep coming back to, as you talked about the future, it is, if you think about genetics being the basis of doggone almost all of medicine now. In other words, genetics used to be this odd little field off to the side. Now it's center core. And we will see more and more genetic-based information, more and more genetic knowledge. the public doesn't understand anything about that. Nobody out there in public land has ever had a course in genetics. Nobody understands what messenger RNA is. When you talk to the Association of Secondary Science School Educators, and you try to help, how can we help you teach more science in the high schools? Their response back to me was, man, we can barely get past the fight over evolution and be able to teach that in the schools, and you're talking about genetics? So my point being that I think that what's different, and again, that's why I keep coming back to, I think that where the opportunity here is for the industry, is that the industry is going to be selling a lot of products from this day on to the American public that are genetic based. And so at some point, the frustration and the irritation and the anxiety and the distrust around this vaccine is going to bleed over into anything else that you sell. Therefore, you need to be a part of selling this project now, of addressing the concerns now, and there has to be a common platform. And this is one case where the individual corporate marketing budget is irrelevant around this issue. It's going to take everybody leveraged together. And I think that that's what I'm hoping we're going to see from the industry trade associations, is pulling all of that together in a major campaign, because we've got to get over the fundamental rate limiting hurdle of ignorance and thereby fear.
Yeah, I was going to add, I mean, that transcends many of our social ills when it comes to healthcare. I mean, clinical trials is another example. The people that don't want to participate in clinical trials are the ones that we need in clinical trials the most. And the reason why they don't do it is because there's not the scientific literacy. They don't know what it sounds scary to them, much like an mRNA-based vaccine. Even though, if you understand how DNA turns into a protein, it doesn't sound scary at all if you have that scientific literacy. So it is going to be a multi-generational fight, to get the public to embrace better healthcare. Period.
Absolutely. And let's talk about a little bit more about some of those new treatments that are coming on the scene. We're talking about some of these new vaccines, but what about some other treatments for COVID-19? What should we be looking for in the coming months?
I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, I think the kinds of technologies that give us the monoclonal antibodies I think is going to be key. I think the technologies around new kinds of vaccine delivery mechanisms, and also, of course, the ability to be mobile and flexible. I think we're going to start looking at things that will be related to multiple disease vaccines at the same time, as we start to focus on flu and RSV. All these concomitant things I think are important. But ultimately, I don't know that any of us have a good enough picture of the kinds of genius that is percolating inside of these companies. It will be exciting to see. I certainly know that we start looking at things like gene-based treatments, and gene modification therapies. I mean, there's so much exciting stuff on the horizon. But all I think this comes back to is, and I don't mean to just keep hitting the same theme, but I think we've just got to understand, if everything that is about to happen is going to be complicated at its core. Everything that is about to happen will be novel ideas that will need to be communicated to a physician, who then has to be able to communicate that to a patient. Right. And then, of course, the final element it has to be is, let's be very straightforward. It's the affordability question. While we certainly have a big demand now for COVID-related vaccines, what we're going to have to ultimately look at from a business model point of view is, will the kinds of therapeutic interventions required for treating COVID once existing, will there be enough of an epidemiological marketplace for that? Will there be enough people that need that? And will the technologies be affordable enough to be able to be introduced effectively into the marketplace? On top of, by the way, all the other extremely expensive blockbusters that are about to come down the pathway. So I think any answer to your question has got to triangulate between what will be the demand curve, what will be the price curve, and then what will be the ways in which we will ultimately be able to make affordable these kinds of drugs, in addition to the other disease demands that are also happening simultaneously.
Absolutely. Fascinating conversation. And you touched on a point there where you were looking at, those of us who work in the industry, we get very excited about when we see new science coming along, and we get excited about personalized medicine on all those breakthroughs in terms of technology and science, but that doesn't translate down to the general population. And so it's going to take some time and some education to clue people in that this is really a good thing. This is great science that's happening, and it's not to be feared. It should be embraced.
So if I had a last word here, I don't know whether we're pretty close for time, but I know this is something that I appreciate about Real Chemistry and Seth and his team's work. I think that what if I sort of could just boil this whole thing back down to what I would hope that would be in the minds of the industry at this moment will be the regaining of trust. I think that every activity that can possibly occur within the companies, how these companies relate to the communities around them, how they communicate with each of their customers who are the end users of their products, how they relate to their business partners at every level, from the way in which clinical research is conducted all the way through to engaging in marketing and advertising. Everything, I think, has to be based upon a fundamental sense now that you can have confidence in this industry. You can have confidence in medicine. You can have confidence in my individual company. And what Seth's team and Real Chemistry are doing for me is really teaching us at the Black Coalition Against COVID how to formulate and implement that kind of message of trustworthiness. And I think that you all are lucky to have Real Chemistry as a partner.
Absolutely. That is a great last word, Dr. Tuxen. Seth, we'll leave you with the last word.
Why end, I can't improve upon that, being thanked by Dr. Tuxen for the work that we do. But, I think that, communication's at the foundation of change in healthcare, absolutely. And I was mentioning earlier, growing scientific literacy is obviously one challenge, but also as new therapies come into the market, as personalized therapies come into the market in particular, you can no longer have those commercials you were alluding to earlier where you just have people running around in the fields happy. I mean, that's not going to be sustainable. Many new therapies that come out are only applicable, really only are going to be effective and create a good experience for maybe 20, 30, 50,000 people. So again, really being judicious in how we communicate, finding the right HCPs, finding the right patients that are going to that really need that therapy. That is the next challenge, I think, for our industry. But it's a challenge I think we're all more than willing to take on.
Gentlemen, what a wonderful conversation. It was frank, it was authentic, and it was really very informative. And thank you so much for lending your tremendous insights to this think tank. Best of luck to all. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for guiding us through it so well. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And that will do it for this think tank. I hope all of you benefited from this event and have taken away some new insights. If any of your colleagues missed this presentation, or if you want to see it again, it will be available as a recording in about 24 hours, and you will be notified via email. I'd like to once again thank our friends at Real Chemistry and our amazing panelists for partnering with us on such a great event. I'd also like to encourage you to consider our past and future web seminars and virtual panels by visiting pharmavoice.com/webinars. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. The event is now over.